Well, hello, buddy, and welcome back to the Showrunner Whisperer. This is your podcast dedicated to going inside the minds of your favorite television showrunners in Hollywood and what it means to be a showrunner in today's television landscape. My name is Andy Behbakht, Andy B, or just Andy, whatever you want to refer to me as. And if anyone who is new, welcome. So happy to have you. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back. Hope you're doing well. Hope all of you guys are doing well at the start of this beautiful May. And we're here for another episode of the Showrunner Whisperer. And once again, I want to express a huge thanks to everyone who's been supporting and checking out the episodes and downloading and subscribing. All of that helps so much. Today we're doing something different on this episode of the Showrunner Whisperer. So this will serve as part one of my chat with the Gotham Knights showrunners James Stoteraux and Chad Fiveash, who I was honored to chat with them all the way back in January, I believe. They were my earliest guests that I had on, and I've known these guys for a couple of years now, so getting together with them was just like good old times. And because we chatted for 2 hours, I felt it was a good idea to maybe split this up into 2 episodes and kind of just so everyone can kind of like take in a lot of what they were saying. And because we will also shift the schedule a little bit later in May because of another show that's coming back. So we want to make sure that we line it all up. So part 2 will actually be coming out in early June instead. But I'm really excited for you guys to hear our conversation. We spoke a lot about the aftermath of the writer's strike, and this was very much right after the strikes had ended, and we were just starting to kind of get back into the groove of things in the industry. And they talked a lot about their state of minds and also just the development of Gotham Knights, especially during this period. And there's a lot of stories to come out of this first episode with them. And one story in particular that I know a lot of you will have thoughts on and will have reactions to maybe. And I'm really it's a story that it's a story that still gets to me that I think we'll get to a lot of you as well. But I hope you guys enjoy this episode. And as always, if you're enjoying the show, if you're enjoying the Showrunner Whisperer, hit that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts and wherever you get your podcast ad, or on the YouTube channel for Multiverse of Color, and follow all the social media links for the show, because it is a great way to help us get supported and grow so we can reach more audiences, because we're just getting started on this amazing journey of exploring what it means to be a showrunner today, especially in Hollywood that is evolving and changing, maybe for the good, for worse. That remains to be seen. So, but I'm gonna stop talking, and I'm gonna let you guys enjoy my chat with Chad and James for part one of this interview on the Showrunner Whisperer, and I will see you at the very end. So enjoy. I can't start this conversation without, first of all, asking you guys a little bit about the strike, because you guys just finished, went through a really long battle in 2023, and fighting for your rights. What is your state of mind today after the VGA has signed a deal? You guys are getting back to work. Where are you guys at today?
I mean, I think for all of us there's a relief that it's over. I mean, it was a necessary battle. But it's one that we're glad. I think every aspect from this, or every part of the industry is really just anxious to just all get back to work.
Yeah.
I'm glad we got the gains that we got.
It's a good deal.
I feel like ultimately all of those gains could have happened back in April. That's a little frustrating, but I think we're all just eager to move past it and just really gear up start the trains running again.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think with the WGA strike ending when it did, and the and SAG after strike ending, kind of right at the end of the year, it was and running into the holidays and everything. I think that there was the sense that well, we can there's only so much we can do at the end of the year, and I think now that it's a brand new year with the industry unions getting substantial gains and ready to get back to work, I think really the town is really ready to. It certainly feels like that. Getting back to work. It's
a little bit weird though. It feels like the studios we're hearing like, oh, they're saying, oh, people aren't bringing us stuff, and then you hear writers saying, well, we're not bringing stuff because we're here, no one's buying, and it feels like a middle school dance where you're trying to convince two people just make the first move. So I feel like that was a lot of just the immediate post-strike world. But so I do. I was gratified to hear that there are pilots being picked up, and I think that everyone is just really anxious to. There's this kind of pent-up energy of people ready to get back into writers' rooms. I mean, some shows obviously have started back up, but I think we're all just hoping that January of 2024 becomes this kind of dam breaks deluge of people getting back to work.
Yeah, that's interesting that the studios are like, oh, no one is bringing us anything, because I feel like throughout the strike, we saw really some of the nastier sides of these studios, and especially through how they were using the trades of the thing that still sticks with me is how there was that one executive who was talking about well, we're gonna drag this out until they start losing their homes, and I'm like, guys, you cannot, these are real human beings. Did that for you guys? Did that really drive your fire of listen, we will walk those streets, we will picket those lines till the end of time.
In the sense that yes, I think that was a massive PR blunder, and because here's the reality is, and we've been doing this now a long time, is that we have good friends on the studio sides at almost all the studios, they're really good people. Yeah. And I think that they're not the enemy. We've always considered the studios like these are our collaborative partners. Mm-hmm. And all of them almost across the board are they're
very pro-writer.
In the trenches with us, mm-hmm. wanting to solve problems. Obviously, there's pressures that we don't necessarily understand. And so I do feel like comments like that, I honestly don't think are the sort of rank and file. The majority, 99.9% of the people that we're dealing with and working with, comments like that, to me, I immediately basically felt like it was one of the people that are a little bit closer to Wall Street, that are simply looking at numbers and not looking at this as an industry that thrives on passion. And I think one of the disappointing trends of recent years has been some of the people at the top don't seem to be driven by passion. They seem to be driven much more by a bottom line. And that energy is so short-sighted.
They don't seem to love TV or movies. I don't know. That's my gut, but yeah, but to your point about the stuff when you hear stuff like that, I remember where I was on, out in front of, on the strike line at Radford Studios, and everybody was just, everybody was pissed and energized. It was kind of like, oh, really? It's like you say, Andy, I'll walk these lines. It really was. And they just kind of kept losing the PR war. And again, they're not our enemies, but it was just like, it was unfortunate that, as James says, so many good people at the studios and the networks. And then, the thing that cuts through is this really, kind of cruel comment that, doesn't speak for the majority of them.
Because even during the strike, that the execs that were friends or that have a social relationship with, most of them were incredibly supportive. And even right after, it was sort of this attitude. It was not there wasn't. It didn't feel like we'd gone through some acrimonious divorce or something. That everyone sort of, there was this spirit of hey, I'm glad you got what what you needed. I'm just glad that so it hasn't, I think that a lot of people were maybe prepared for some weirdness. But at least we have not experienced that. We've experienced just sort of enthusiasm to get started.
A lot of these people are our friends. And I mean, you want your friends to do well. Vice versa. I think that, I want them to, we all want to get back to making television and movies and, because that's going to,
and I think
that's what we do.
The thing that has become very apparent is just that you also have had a situation where executives sometimes didn't understand the pressures we're under, and likewise we just sort of extrapolate from that, of always sort of assuming that there's stuff that from their side that we're not quite understanding. And I think with some of these things, it was interesting hearing where some of the demands of explaining why these weren't demands so much of, oh, I just want my piece of the pie getting bigger, but the ripple effect of some of those things, of why that's actually, you're not realizing this from the executive side, but what we're asking for is actually going to make your job easier. And things like I don't think understanding like the way residuals that from their perspective looks like, well, money we've already paid you to do a job that you did 10 years ago. Why are we paying you again? Why are you complaining that those amounts have been so shrunken through streaming? But not understanding that that's what allows writers to maintain a career over a long enough lifespan, of where you may have these follow periods where you're
the dry spells. Yeah, we've all.
And if you without that, you will find that you'll constantly have people sort of being driven out of the industry because they financially can't afford to be a part of it. And if that's if this constant churn of showrunners or even staff writers, you're constantly having to have everyone relearn all the lessons. And when you've dealt with somebody who's had a decade or so of experience, that we're able to do things in a much more cost-effective fashion. We're not constantly learning all the terrible lessons that you learn in your first couple jobs that we all learn, the mistakes we all make. If you don't have a system in place where you have a bit of a safety net where people can extend through those difficult times, you will just be having every show be run by somebody who is a first-time showrunner. Or not necessarily every show, but you'll have a lot of shows where you're constantly having people relearn the same mistakes. And we're making the executives' lives easier when we're able to say, hey, we got this. We'll make sure that there are scripts on time. We'll make sure that we're hitting our budget numbers and we're hitting our delivery dates.
Well, and it's also not like the studios, they continue to make money off the episodes and shows. I mean, that's the thing. It's not like, it's kind of like, yeah, but you've sold that 3, 5, 10 times overseas, come on.
And
there's new viewers international that you guys have, because it's not, and that's what they're not thinking of. And also, you would think that they would have learned something about, hey, COVID was a really rough time for everyone where we actually couldn't shoot anything. We could just write and write. So it's like, you would figure they would have learned something from that.
And they did, it's so much, and I just, because I sort of believe in trying to give people as much grace as possible.
Of course.
It is, except me.
Except, but it is. The response to COVID. It was really interesting. That I think that is generally the studios are they try to spend as little money as they can, and in the response to COVID, it was actually very gratifying the way that they. We're very much understanding we have to spend money to keep these shows in production and to keep people safe. And that they very much were not trying to penny pinch with things like COVID.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that, because that would have been a very easy decision to say, well, wait, why are the budgets going up because of the pandemic? Do we really need to do this? And I think generally that they did embrace the fact that these were necessary costs. The downside to it is obviously these were necessary costs, and that money is not just, has to come from somewhere. But that was certainly a case where I felt like I think because they were seeing it in that it wasn't some thing that happened out of their purview, that they were understanding that they had to spend money on this to get the shows running. And that the penny pinching of not doing these things was actually going to shut down or keep shows shut down further.
The COVID protocols that they said. through the pandemic, we were at Warner Brothers, and their response I thought was just incredible. I mean, just the Herculean effort that they put into, setting up protocols, setting up testing, setting up all that stuff. I mean, it was something.
The attitude was very much, what do you need to get back and going?
Yep.
Here, do it.
Yeah. But especially for you guys, because the show that because you guys were in you guys were just starting Batwoman, and there was all these changes with the lead changing, but then also finding out that we don't even get to finish our first season. So like if that must be a big ball to deal with.
That week just before the shutdown was one of the craziest things we've ever experienced, and it was tough in terms of. And out of that, what's interesting is because obviously with Batwoman, what was supposed to be our season 1 finale, ended up just being the episode 20 finale. Or 20 became our finale.
Episode 20 became.
And then we had the 2 scripts written that were supposed to be, and they were fantastic, and we were able to repurpose a bit of it at the beginning of season 2. But the interesting lesson from that was when doing season 2, 3, and then even a bit with Gotham Knights, is understanding the jeopardy that you could find yourself with the axe coming down of for whatever reason that you may not get to finish the season. Is we made sure every episode we did could serve as a finale. That it was not a hold back scenario, and that every episode you had to live with the possibility that this may be the last episode of the season or the last episode of the show.
Well, no, I was just saying we were fortunate. I mean, we got kind of lucky that episode 20 did kind of have thing. And that was just, we had to, I think tinker with a little bit, but it's
but that was also a little bit coming out of Vampire Diaries, was that there you go. We always started, that was kind of the deal with that show, was that you'd end on these like little cliffhangers or these little kind of throw it in, but we sort of took that approach and then amped it up more so that things could serve. And the greatest compliment you would get from either our producing partners or from the studio themselves was always when they would read a script and be like, wow, this read like a finale. It was always sort of the nicest compliment.
What can be more of a season finale cliffhanger than Tommy Elliott just putting on Bruce Wayne's face and just freaking out the entire comic community, because we all know how DC acts with Bruce Wayne and Batman when it comes to TV. Like the fact that night, I still remember that night because people were losing their absolute crap of like, they can do this? They can actually do this? So
and what's funny is that this is why I do love episodic television and is that portion, every season you start with a plan, and it's all the sort of fun is during your hiatus when you look back at the original like document that you sort of pitched to the studio or the network or that you came up with, and it's fun seeing where the surprise is always how much you actually did in those first 2 weeks. Generally the first 2 weeks of a new season you spend trying to hammer out the tentpole moments in the trajectory of the show. And what's always fun is then looking back and being like, wow, we did that. And then also the fun is the times where you realize where you discovered something in the middle of the season and things veered off. And what's interesting is, so Tommy Elliott was never in the original plan at the beginning of the season. Tommy Elliott was a bit more of a one-off, not so much a one-off, but he was essentially just, we were sort of thinking him for episode 3. It was sort of the perfect foil for Batwoman as she takes on the mantle of being Batwoman and the notion of imposter versus, authentic, person. And Tommy was just a perfect foil for that. And then we just loved the actor so much, and it was so ripe that we then ended up bringing him back, and then that ended up being sort of the perfect end of the season thing. But it was not actually intended to carry into season 2.
No,
but we're very blessed. It's such a great character. That was sort of nice to extend it.
Getting to show Bruce Wayne. The folks at DC really came through for us, because it's always a dance, and you have to be very specific about you know, what we're going to show. It's not going to be real Bruce Wayne. We're going to be very clear about this. We're not going to, you know, but they really went to bat and got us what we needed, and it certainly came through in the show.
And that's where it does become tough, because we certainly understand their concern, which I don't necessarily entirely share, is that they feel like it's confusing to the audience. And I think certainly in the landscape of where wanting everything to kind of be within the shared universe, like we get it. But at the same time, you are, when trying to adapt certain things, find yourself, it's hard to tell the Tommy Elliott story without Bruce.
Yeah.
And it certainly becomes in like certain things of where, well, they'll let you use a character, but you can't really tell that story if you don't use this other character that they're reluctant to let you use, or because they have different producers handling different projects, what will happen is you find out like, oh, you can't use this because some other
it's being used
writer or producer, it's earmarked for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they at least during our time there was really tried to do a great job of juggling and making sure these characters were being used wisely. But it was always sort of a little bit frustrating when you found out like, oh, this thing that you feel like you had a big arc for, oh, well, it was used as a one-off on another show.
Oh God, yeah.
So that's always a bit tricky. But I do feel like with all the demands that the execs at DC were dealing with, that they were as accommodating as they could be. And certainly with Gotham Knights as well. I mean,
well, I was going to say, occasionally you get, you know, with all the kind of like, we don't know if we, you know, occasionally you'll get one of the surprises. Like I still, you know, with Gotham Knights, when we were like, okay, you know, we know Gotham did, you know, the Fox Gotham did the Court of Owls, but, you know, we need like a kind of Court of Owls type thing, you know, type group, you know, talking to the people at DC. And I remember Kim Roberto shot us an email back and says, what if I could tell you that the Court of Owls are available? Because they are. And I was actually sitting almost right where I am now. And I still maintain that you can hear the screams from this room of joy in Burbank when we found out we could use Court of Owls. So, and
they are very, what I did love about our execs at DC was that they very much understood it. When you couldn't just say, hey, could I use this character? You'd have to explain why. You'd have to have a very good reason why. And that even with all the limitations, they would be accommodating. I mean, one of the things that I don't know if we've quite exactly talked about, but we were able to, we felt like it was, well, the fact that we were given permission for one episode to be able to use Batman for Gotham Knights. And we felt it was very important to tell,
like full suited Batman.
There was a scene from The Dark Knight Returns that we wanted to look at it to dramatize.
And, you've heard of it?
No, it was Robin's audition sides was this the first interaction between her and Batman, and everyone loved the scene, and we felt like this was an important to tell Robin's backstory to show this meeting. And it was one of those things where initially, you know, there was a bit of reluctance for that, but our executives really fought and said, look, I think that this is the perfect setup and perfect sort of way to do this. It was kind of like, you get this one scene you can do. And so
I was going to say, we were also very clear about, you know, this is a flashback, you know, Bruce Wayne Batman is dead in our universe. But you know, it's already kind of, you know, Carrie talks about it in the show. She or at least alludes to it. And so, yeah, I mean, we were very clear that this is not going to become the Carrie Batman show. We're not trying to, you know, do an end run or anything. It was like very much, this is part of our history, but it's going to stay there in history. Sorry.
You know, and so it's one of those things where they gave us permission, and then, you know, unfortunately, who would have played that role? It's just sort of devastating. Which is Kevin Conroy was too sick at that point, and for us he was always my favorite Batman. And since we were dealing with an older Batman, and you can still see in some of the DNA of things, like we for the pilot used a photo double, and it's not quite an accident. The photo double looks a lot like Kevin, and that was very much intentional. And so it was one of those things where we just weren't able to, and we wanted to do it. We didn't want to just do this with a random person. We felt like it was important, somebody of Kevin's stature and somebody that had this gravitas, and obviously he was the right age for that.
Yeah.
So that was initially what we were that was the initial plan, and it was just obviously it was very sad that he died, but we were
of course.
So we didn't want to do it just with slotting somebody in there, and then Misha was trying to bring in Jensen, which would have been awesome.
Yeah.
Cut that out and all of that, whatever. But it was also, and so ultimately it was one of those things where we were like, because we wanted it to be sort of this impactful, and we wanted to be someone that had a lot of gravitas, that we weren't able to pull that off. We didn't want to just do it to do it. And so that's why that never ended up happening. Yeah. But I have to say DC was really terrific about trying to help us make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, we had the scene, we had that. I mean, they again, that was the audition side, as you mentioned, and we just, I was like, it's never gonna happen. Maybe, no, never gonna happen. And and unfortunately it didn't, but not because DC wasn't on board, because they loved the scene and everything. It was just, a lot of things, it's one of the, that's, I wish we could have, but,
Yeah.
But again, it also just shows how, because one of the things that I always love about you guys is that, how nerdy you guys are just as like the rest of us. So, like, I mean, because I can't, because when people listen to this, like my eyes like literally lit up, like, they were actually gonna do like something from The Dark Knight Returns, again, because Carrie was such a favorite of mine of the show that I'm like, I would have loved to have seen, to have actually gotten to see what her Bruce was like, what her Batman interaction was like. So that, I mean, it's just having Kevin Conroy, because you guys also got to have Kevin on Batwoman,
which is great,
spectacular, man.
It also, and also for
which is why we wanted him again. Sorry, I jumped.
And for us, if we had to pick one sort of touchstone for what the Gotham Knights would, there obviously a lot of the look we sort of had was similar to the look of the Fox Gotham. In that many of our we had a lot of people from both, that worked on both shows, but we were very much trying to, as much as we could, utilize the look of the Batman the Animated Show. I mean, it's just so the animated series. Yeah, it's so brilliant. And so that was the biggest probably visual touchstone, even though we couldn't quite, you couldn't quite sort of.
Well, there's some things that show you could never reproduce in live action, because it's just so, the gorgeous animation and everything. I mean, and that's completely appropriate, because there are things that live in the animated series that, you're not going to be able to touch, and don't even try. Just go watch the animated series again.
It's just a brilliant show.
Yeah. I mean, that was the dirigibles. I mean,
that's where the GCPD airships came from.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that kind of that timeless noir look of that show, we were very much trying to capture as much as possible. Yeah. And so obviously Kevin was sort of the perfect, but that's where that kind of landed, that it just made so much sense. But.
So anyway, R.I.P.
Yeah. Hopefully he's watching all over us and seeing how much. I
like the thought of that.
Yeah, and he was fantastic on Batwoman. He really was. And again, let us that playing that version of the character and getting, it's just great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but so something that I because I just realized that I should have, because I always at the beginning of each of these episodes, but because we, the three of us, we can talk about nerd stuff all day long. But what is I want to see what both of your answers are to this. But what is your definition of a showrunner?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, it's interesting that for the first time, it's actually now that out of the strike, that the minimum basic agreement actually defines showrunner as a writer, which I think was an important thing. I mean, I think that generally that people have always seen it it's sort of the equivalent of some sort of CEO figure, in that you are in charge of this. The show itself is a company. It's a multi-million-dollar company. And so you are dealing with everything from the creative direction of that company, but also the financial responsibilities. And I think that's where it is this intersection of art and commerce manufacturing in a way, like keeping this tens of millions of dollars of budget and making it so at the end of this that we have how many episodes that are on schedule, on budget. So it's a very strange in the sense that it's not purely creative in the artistic sense of just simply creating a vision for the show, but also creating the infrastructure in which to be able to produce that and to produce that on time and on schedule and on budget.
And come out with a quality product that people really.
And it's the the deal in I think one of the most unheralded skill sets of it is really managing people. And because this is a creative medium, this isn't a novel. We're not, novelist where, we're all sitting and sort of, purely just writing exactly what we want. It's so intensely collaborative, not just among the other writers, but creating a shared vision that everyone can be steering the ship towards. I mean, it's a crew of, between 200 to 400 people. And what the shows that I think work really well is where everyone is steering the ship towards that same vision. And where you will find problems is when people don't entirely understand that vision, or people are working at cross purposes, and trying to get all 400 people sort of rowing in the same direction, but also creating an environment where people not only sort of get the vision, but are contributing to it. And that's one of the things that we've sort of loved the most is we're, hiring people that are incredibly passionate, but are also bringing things to the show and making it. I mean, one of the things we said with any of the shows that we're sort of been involved in, but certainly ones that we're running, is that we very much see it is our show, not in the sense of ours. The two of us, it always gets a little confusing, but our is in all of us working on
our
the show.
That way, not our. No, I mean to your point. I mean, but with the vision and making sure, and part of the job as a showrunner is you got to communicate that vision. Like if you don't communicate it, and let people know, then you can be firing blind, but also being, I mean, at least the way we do it is being, and James talked a little bit about this, is being receptive to, and not even just receptive, just wanting other people, I mean, we when we built the staff for the writing staff for Gotham Knights, for instance, we picked people from a lot of different, backgrounds that, I want a writer to pitch something to me that in a million years I could sit for a million years trying to figure that out. I would never get it because they are pulling from their experience and their truth and everything. And that's what I want. That's what's going to make the show better. Because if it's just, me and him, we can do only so much. But I mean, I think that, that's what makes a staff and the machine James is talking about work so well. Because
I do think the shows that you do find that are written solely by one person, and I do understand in some ways the creative impulse for that. But I think that one of the things that we've, as having come up in the system, what you become rapidly aware of is that an individual person, as creative as they are, will have their bag of tricks, and they'll have their whatever the limits of their experience or their viewpoints or their backgrounds are, is that you will find that they do tend to start repeating things, or they're not even aware of it. I mean, that's the crazy thing, is that you're so swimming in your own artistic ambitions or your own sensibilities that you're not noticing you've done this before. You've done this many times before. And
are we guilty of that?
Yes. I mean, I had one of the more horrifying moments, and I've said this about other things we're saying, how you become not aware of it. And it wasn't until it was the promos that they were cutting for Gotham Knights that there was a phrase that I realized that became our sort of shorthand as speed through exposition, that it was in two promos back to back. And that made me realize, oh my, and so I quickly was then looking through the scripts and realizing, oh, I used this phrase way too much, and that I just hadn't even noticed it.
Well, actually, I think we both are guilty. It's someone want to give me a crash
course in like, so that it's a way of speeding through like kind of the bottom line. But that's why you end up like, if you go to YouTube and you type in Aaron Sorkin supercut, you will find where people have painstakingly cut together from all his different shows characters saying the exact same things over and over and over again. And it's not even a case of, I think it's not so much a case of where I think Aaron is just ripping himself off or is just sort of lazily cutting and pasting. I think he's probably not aware of it. And you're not aware of it until somebody puts together one of these supercuts.
And it's all brilliant. It's all
or until it weirdly, two of these lines end up being in the same, in a promo back to back that you're like, oh, and so that's where I do think it's the idea of with having, just being able to broaden out the ideas and broadening out the direction and most of the unexpected. I think always my favorite things on most shows that I've worked on have been when somebody pitches this just crazy idea that they even, it's so crazy they kind of pitch it as a joke. Yeah. And everyone's like, holy shit, like that's the way to that's suddenly this direction that you never in a million years would have thought of.
Well, I'm sorry.
And I think the same thing also extends to the rest of the crew, being able to work with people. If you've, where the costume designer brings stuff to the table that you would never have thought of, or the director of photography comes up with this amazing thing that is that's when you realize you're kind of firing all cylinders, when the things that people are bringing is elevating the show in a way that in stuff that's beyond that you could ever thought of.
Well, we very much encourage people to take James's thing, the big swing, like not the big or big swings plural, that it may not go over, it may not be right for the episode, it may not be right for the show or whatever, or the moment, but you're never going to get dinged by us for bringing something like and you don't even need to preface it with, okay, this is crazy, but because and sometimes an idea is not right for that moment, but James and I we'll go back to something like, okay, remember the thing you pitched 3 episodes ago? That would go really well, like right here, because it's just crazy enough or weird enough or whatever. And so I think that that one of the things that that made Gotham Knights so gratifying was that people felt like they could do that, and that it's a safe space. And look, a lot of people like to say it's a safe. We've worked on shows where it's like, oh, it's a safe space.
Trap.
Not a safe space. Not a safe space at all. Yeah, trap. Exactly.
Hey, how you doing, party people? Let me whisper in your ear. Tell you a little something you might like to hear. What's going on, brothers and sisters? It's your man, Brother Nate from the Lituation Room, as well as the Kings of Sport podcast. And I'm here to tell you about the Multiverse of Color. See, the Showrunner Whisperer is brought to you exclusively by Multiverse of Color. Now, Multiverse of Color is your home for fresh takes on the world of pop culture by established journalists and emerging content creators. It's your one-stop destination for a vast array of articles, as well as audio and video productions. Multiverse of Color features exclusive interviews, media event coverage, and film analysis. We're talking about all films, all movies out here on these streets, from Hollywood's biggest blockbusters to the most intimate of independent projects. So visit multiverseofcolor.com today, yes, today, right now, for all of the latest stories, and follow Multiverse of Color through the social media links provided in the description below. And now, back to the Showrunner Whisperer.
But I think that was one of the weird things is obviously we knew, because I would not recommend making a show for a studio that's gone through upheaval while the comic studio is also going through an upheaval and your network is going through an upheaval.
But I don't know what you mean.
That was very tricky, but it also did. We were very much, we knew that it was probably going to be one season, and that it was, we were obviously all going to plan for multiple seasons, but we all sort of understood from the beginning that this was something that we should just leave it on the field. And so out of that was actually very freeing, though, to be able to tell people, to say, hey, do whatever you're not allowed, whatever you want to do on your previous show that they wouldn't let you do. Let's try it.
Let's
try
about,
it.
Yeah.
And so, and we said the worst thing that'll happen is we'll say, don't do that again.
No, that was,
and that was sort of, it was, I think that was very free. And even from a sec, like when we would meet with the directors before like their episode, we would always say to them, we were saying that like, look, we, the show isn't around long enough to where we have hard and fast rules. So let's just invent these rules. And if you want to do something crazy, let's try it. And just our one ask is if it's not really working, don't be terribly precious about it, but let's just kind of go all out and see if it works.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, and I think you also kind of, I mean, we try to lead by example, and like, there are plenty of things that like, I was like, there's no way I'm going to cut this. Yeah, I'm going to cut it. we can't do it. But I mean, the thing is what we always try to, I mean, in the kind of, make the safe spaces. I just don't think that anybody, I know I certainly can't, like you can't work out of a place of fear. You just can't. You're never going to, nobody's going to get, I'm not going to get the best work out of somebody if they're like, if I hate the pitch, I'm going to be like, that sucks. That doesn't help anybody. It sure as hell doesn't help the show. And I think that, we want people to, we may not do it, but I'm not taking a tally of, wow, you pitched 4 things we didn't do. It doesn't work that way. At least I don't.
And I think that's the thing
he does.
That I think because we're ancient and having done this a really long time, we've
ancient. Don't be so hard on yourselves.
Thank you, Andy.
But we've been, because we've come up through the system. You've been on those shows where you are trying to write to please, which is part of the job. I mean, honestly, when you're writing for what the showrunner wants. But it's always funny that sometimes that those things are where you're not trusting so much your gut, but you're writing from the place, as you said, of fear, of where you're afraid they're not going to like this thing. So we don't do this thing. So we do this other thing. It doesn't work quite as well. And then you turn the script in and they're like, well, this doesn't work. And so I think that is one of the hardest lessons, is to know when to veer from the plan and go for that big swing, or sometimes to trust in a vision that you don't, as somebody just being on staff, that may not be entirely your sensibility. But I'm going to trust the showrunner. I'm going to trust that creative impulse of the person who is in charge of that vision. That I'm going to go along with that. And we've certainly had that in our thing where there's been times where we've been like, this is insane. Why are we doing this? This is crazy. And that works like gangbusters. And and that's part of, I think, the learning process. And I think that's one thing. I think the audience, I think that there is this notion, and obviously it's hard to judge from some of the toxic fandoms of on Twitter, but I think there's this notion that I feel like everyone in the room is in lockstep. And I think that the writer's room in some ways can best described as my father's reaction to hearing the way the writer's room works. He was like, so they pay you money to sit in a room and argue? Like, he's confused by that. And it's like, the answer is shockingly yes. And that I think that a lot of times people make assumptions that everyone on the show agrees with everything that's on the show, or that's what they would have done. No, that's not what they would have done necessarily. I mean, I think we do tend to use each other as resources. Is, if we've had situations on shows we've been on, and then shows that we've also run where the staff, the majority of the staff say, hey, I think this is a mistake. And I think that you should at least take another look at it. But it is not one of those things. I think that's why I think a lot of fans would be surprised that if they're upset about something, I guarantee there's probably a couple people on staff that are thought the same way.
Like, oh, I'm with you. Yeah, I tried to tell them.
Because I think that the approach also is, if everyone in that room agrees with everything, it's probably not a great idea.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the reason all of our walls for the most part are off-white in most you know, sort of offices. It's not because we all love off-white. That's the only color we all agree on. And so if there is a staff that agrees on every single, like if you come up with, oh, everyone just loves what we're doing with this character, then it's probably an off-white idea that's just really so bland or so expected. And I think that's also
safe.
And I think that's also part of the challenge with this is you don't want to piss the audience off, but you want to give them something that they were not expecting or something.
You want to challenge them.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, that's why the whole argument over AI, where people positing like, oh, you know, an audience could just make their own version of Game of Thrones or whatever. And I guarantee, yes, if we got to the point where the technology of where you could import whatever you want to happen and see a representation of it, you would hate it, or it would not be satisfying. You would be so bored with it. And I think that is that tough thing of really making the audience, giving them that what they aren't quite aware that they need, without being alienating. I mean, obviously, I don't think that there are certain things as we come with these things as fans as well. And there are shows that I stopped watching because I was like, I don't really like what this direction is going. And I think that's
or they keep doing
fair.
the same thing over.
Or they keep doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
You know, it's a tough thing. I mean, like take like Batman. It's like, do we really need to see Martha Wayne's pearls bounce down more time?
Yeah.
And
it's been done incredibly well, and
a lot of times.
A lot of
that
times.
said, I have the original teaser to 106.
That said, one more time is just perfect.
Nate and Nikki, the writers of that episode, actually pitched a sort of brilliant way. It was really brilliant way of doing it in a slightly different. I mean, the events still happen the same way, but they were almost playing with the fact that we've seen this a million times. That I thought was brilliant, and sadly, because of budget and schedule, we were not actually able to do it. But it was a brilliant kind of playing with, hey, you've seen this a million times.
Not like this.
You know, we're gonna slightly do it in this very clever way. So. But I think that is the tough thing of where I think that I understand the impulse from fans where, like, if there's a beloved book or a comic book or whatever that you want it exactly, you want to see this thing that you have loved rendered in, you know, on screen in this faithful way. But at the same time, when it's done exactly that way, it may work and you may be happy, but I think that you're happier with some sort of surprises or some sort of interpretation that isn't exactly what you expected.
Yeah, I mean, it's with it and having, you know, adapted a number of things, and you know, for, you know, Gotham Knights pilots didn't go, shows that whatever, you know, it is tough because with audience, I mean, and as somebody who, you know, loves things and have seen them come to fruition on screen, you know. As a writer, though, as a writer to a fan, like, I'm never going to be able to beat what's in your head, like what you have in your head about like the feeling that you had when you first read that. We're like, this is the greatest thing ever. I can't beat that, and nor should I be able to, because that is your, you know, that is your love of the.
Because you can't see it again for the second. You can't recreate.
Yeah.
You can't see Star Wars for the first time again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that feeling, I mean, how many people would say like, oh God, if I could pay a tremendous amount of money to see Star Wars again for the first time. And that's when you're adapting stuff, you are running into that problem of where you can't generate that. And you want to give a little bit of some sort of surprise or something that takes it in a slightly different place that hopefully gives you that same feeling of freshness without bastardizing it. And believe me, I understand. I feel for fans that are like, you're ruining my character. Like I do feel the sympathy for that. At the same time, I think that there is a misunderstanding that we're not doing any of this stuff because we hate the characters or we hate the source material. That you don't do these things if you don't love them.
Well, that was, I mean, with Harvey Dent and Gotham Knights. I mean, it was, you know, again, with the spoiler alert, Harvey Dent becomes Two-Face. Like, we feel like probably a lot of our, I know, you heard it here first. But it was coming at it and being able to, okay, you know how this, he's gonna, and I feel like we were in interviews very upfront about, like, you're gonna get to see Two-Face. This is not one of those. Boy,
did we see Two-Face! Like, boy, did that is one of the best practical effects that I've seen on television in a very long time. That I'm like, they did it. Like, they didn't, because we all remember with the Dark Knight, that is very CGI. But you guys were like, f that. We're gonna like actually challenge ourselves, and that's that makes it more special.
I mean, what's interesting because the Dark Knight, like, for me, the thing with the Dark Knight was that he felt like he should be dying, and that everything else, like, it worked for as long as he was on screen for what that is. I thought it totally worked. But if you were gonna for months on end, that felt a little bit tough to do. We also knew that from the scheduling standpoint, that also we were trying to get somebody that was a name and to say, hey, you're going to spend 5 hours in the makeup chair for the end of the season in season 2. That was a bit of a big ask. And fortunately, what was great, I mean, Misha, who is just such a wonderful human being and just so talented and such a committed artist, was that there was one of the early designs, we were avoiding a certain thing because it would add an hour to the makeup effect. And when Misha saw the design, he was like, oh, I wish it was kind of doing this thing more. And we were like, oh, we had nixed that because it would add an hour to your time in the makeup chair. And he was like, let's just do it. Let's just do it. He was
like, we have to, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. We're going to go for it. And if that means okay.
And so we very early on, I mean, I can't remember if we talked about this last time we spoke or whatever, is so the Jason Miller, the makeup artist who did it, we had very early.
You said Jason Miller.
What?
Jason Collins.
Collins, sorry.
You said Jason Miller because I was
watching The Exorcist. Sorry.
You just watched The Exorcist. That's why you said.
Sorry, Jason Collins. Sorry. Not related to Misha. But no, he incredibly talented. And so really we had said we wanted to look very real. We wanted to go more into, while still honoring the heightened element of the comics, we really wanted to look like what would happen if you had this massive chemical burn. Mm-hmm. And so he worked incredibly hard of getting that and making it, all these tests. And then what's interesting is the way when we did that final reveal, which we were building up to all season, and this is a case of just showing how collaborative everything is. Yeah. We had the director of that episode, Jeff Hunt, he was very much like when he read the script, he loved the script, but he was like, does it have to be inside this cramped trailer? Like, it's really limiting me for angles and such. And we were like, we've gone around different versions. We think it has to. He's like, great. So we planned this whole thing, and then we discovered, because of the sodium vapor lighting, which is very yellow, of like the street lamp, that actually had the effect of removing the red from the kind of blood. Yeah. And so it was one of those things you now put it in the lighting, and suddenly
the cramped place that we made Jeff shoot it in.
And so we realized, so it was it was one of those things where at the last second having to. And Jason was great. He was like, look, he was just sort of quickly explaining like how we got a crash course.
I see it now. I had to look up a picture. Like, I see it now. Like, there is a clear red there.
So he went in and made it much. So it's funny that if you do look at some of the behind the scenes stuff, it's much he's not in that light. It's much redder, and his face is almost a purple. Yeah. But it was one of those things where, again, everyone sort of quickly collaborating in this way to make this look the way that we wanted it to look. Yeah. And it was one of those moments of where we knew from the fans' perspective we couldn't screw this up. Yeah. At the same time, so you're also trying to find that sweet spot. We didn't want to go with Tommy Lee Jones. That was a little bit too much comic book. Yeah. But making it look real.
That's a generous way of saying it.
Well, I mean, I think
it's
for the tone of that movie, it probably it probably is in the right wheelhouse. That's where it's tough because you don't want to put things up where you've always noticed. If you were to insert something super real into Schumacher's vision, which to be honest is not that steers away from sort of my own personal sensibilities. But if you were to put this incredibly graphic, realistic thing, it probably would make that movie even more bizarre.
Yeah, I think it would have been. Yeah, but I mean, it was one of those moments where we're on the set and I mean, everybody from us to Jeff Hunt to Misha to Jason Collins. I mean, everybody was it was one of those things, and it's very when you're on set and like you're just trying to get things shot so you can move on. But it was one of those moments where it was so great to have everybody like, okay, we can figure this out. Let's take a minute and bat ideas around, and nothing's wrong. We just knew what we all wanted out of it, and ultimately, I mean, I could not be happier with what you ended up seeing, and it goes from. Yeah, it's a really tense moment because, I mean, it's the reveal of our Two-Face. We have to, as James says, we have to get it right. But when, if you can, and this is, getting back to being a showrunner, when you can kind of, try to surround yourself with people who are going to have your back and are going to do their absolute best. I mean, that's why, treat people, with respect that you would want. And, they're going to want to go that extra mile for you. And that was a moment where it really, thank God for Jeff Hunt, thank God for Jason Collins, and I mean, and thank God for Misha, because everybody really, and that's only that there's so much more people that were involved in making that come together. But
and we're also just lucky being as you're trying to with that scene. There's so much technical stuff, and that's where we really hemmed everyone in by staging it in this very cramped environment where you're trying to, I mean, literally to get that where his turn into the light was such a technical moment. At the same time, you need the emotion and the character to resonate. And so, like, one of the things watching the scene, we realized it was very strange that Jane Doe, we didn't script a line for her. And this is one of those things where, you type away in your office and then it's not so you get on your feet that you're like, wow, this character actually, if I was actually in this scene, and when we write, we try and write from a place of what would we do? I mean, Chad, this is where we're sort of very fortunate in having a writing partner, is that we can, I don't want to say we act out this stuff because that would be embarrassing.
No, but come on, that's
said,
we're going to do a scene for you. We prepared.
I am a wonderful duella dent. I just will say. But that you sometimes realize when you do get on set, you're like, oh, you sort of realize this character would say something. So it was actually one of my favorite moments on set was where we were kind of realizing, and you could sense with Lindsay,
Lindy Booth, yeah,
that there wasn't.
There was like an absence of dialogue.
Yeah,
it felt like an absence.
You could see that she could that she was really sort of trying to struggle with the fact that I'm not saying anything, and so we're like, hey, we think we need a line. And so we're trying to come up with it. Also, at the same time, we're sort of dealing with a million other things. And now you're putting this on this wonderful actress who's trying to. And then Misha's the one who chimed in with, "What about if she says, give me Harvey, give me a chance?" And that was just such a it was the perfect line right in that moment
to do that.
And it was a wonderful, it played into it so perfectly. And that was one of those things where you realize, by casting the right people that are so invested and so love these characters so much that, Misha being able to just rattle that off, I don't know if we'd had much more time if we'd ever come up with a line that was just perfect. And that's a moment that I thought was just like, wow, this is,
we didn't write it.
We didn't write it.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm
but again, like you're I mean, I'm not saying this to blow smoke up your ass, but like because I really got so invested in what you guys did with Harvey, and this is why this is my and it's sad that the show didn't get to continue because this has become now my favorite Two-Face, because there's because you tackle from he doesn't go insane because he gets ass in it thrown at him. It's because there's a lot of struggle that he has had to deal with as a kid, and again, it's like I never knew there would be a world where I was like, oh my god, I'm crying for Harvey. I'm actually crying for Harvey Dent, like the flip the flip coining freak that scared the crap out of me as a kid. Like I'm actually crying for him now. So that just shows a lot what you guys are capable and willing to do as creators. So and I don't think AI could ever come up with that. So
yeah.
Well,
thank you for saying that. That's
no, and it is one of those things. I mean, we very early on did understand. I mean, that's the trouble with also adapting comics that were written in a different time is that there are certain things that now days wouldn't fly so much, and we were very much conscious of. We didn't want this to be Harvey's now disfigured, so now he's evil.
Yeah,
and that we wanted to.
It was not true to how things like that happen, and it was also kind of irresponsible. It as you say, it doesn't fly.
So, but one of the things that we'd always wanted to do a flashback with young Harvey and the dad, and that's one of the things. Just as far as budget and schedule, we just weren't able to. We weren't able to do, and so. But I do think Misha's. I mean, generally the phrase that you hear with screenwriting is show, don't tell. That said, I think Misha's the monologue that he has in 105. Yeah, 105.
With Chase Mervyn with Gracie Juno. Yeah.
Ellen Summer just really just nailed it, and we're great and wrote that, and it was just in his performance you were like, oh wow, this actually has the gravitas that we were looking for, and not just the kind of cheap fun. I don't know, like it was a way of really deepening that story, and Misha's performance was just so great.
Yeah, I mean it was I mean one of the things that when we were very early courting Misha Collins to be our Harvey Dent was we said our intention was to do the definitive Harvey Dent story, and that's not taking away from the Nolan or anything like that, because I think those were all really great. But the thing that we had that they didn't have was real estate, like story real estate. We had we knew we had at least 13 episodes to tell that story, whereas in a feature you've got so much other stuff going on, and you have to do an origin story for that character. And we really, it was, I mean, I still, think that Harvey Dent is the most tragic character in comic book history. And if you're going to do it, let's do it. Let's use that story real estate to fall in love with him, and then, make that tragedy really land.
And I think that is where the challenge, especially if you're adapting something where people know the ending. One of the things that I always, one of my favorite filmmakers, James Cameron, I loved the trick he pulled off with Titanic, is that the ending, but it takes you to an emotional place where you will do anything to make this ship not sink, even though it's going to sink. And I thought that was an incredible magic trick of pulling that off. And I think to the same extent we understood with Harvey Dent is that Two-Face in many ways is the more interesting character, and the kind of impulse to let's just get to that. And I understand that's why a lot of different live action versions just get to that part, because it does feel like, well, that's where it's going. Let's just skip over it. Let's not keep the audience bored out of their minds waiting for Two-Face to come out. And so our approach to this is a way of, since we knew we weren't going to do that till the end of the season, is to not make the audience feel like we're just sitting on the ball. And to create a situation also where they care about this character so much that you don't want this thing to happen, building to this point where you don't want him to end up becoming Two-Face. And I think that's where a lot of the storytelling of making that compelling and interesting and making him sympathetic. But that is it's a hard challenge where I can imagine many fans, I don't know if this is true or not, but where, because this guy's going to become a villain, that you automatically assume nefarious motivations within the character before you get to that point. So a lot of our structure of season 1 was really designed to make you root for him.
And that's going to be a good place to wrap part 1 of my chat with Chad and James. Love these guys so much. And there's so much more they have to tell about developing Gotham Knights, as well as other chapters of their Hollywood careers that will be spotlighted in part 2. And I want to once again thank everyone who's been checking out the show and who checked out this episode. And as I mentioned at the top, now that you've heard part 1, I'm sure to a lot of my fellow Batman and DC fans out there who heard a story about what they were planning to do with Kevin Conroy, the late Kevin Conroy, is this it got to me hard after I finished recording with them. Like I got really emotional because this is the Batman I grew up with, and I know so many people around the world who did too, and I'm trying not to get emotional, so it's hard to talk about these kind of things, but Kevin Conroy was a legend and an icon, and the fact that Chad and James wanted to bring him in and also recognize the fact that he is an icon to the DC legacy, no matter where you live in the world. If you're reading a comic or you're playing a video game or you're watching a TV show or a movie, you're probably thinking very much about Kevin Conroy being your definitive Batman. But with that being said, I look forward to you guys to check out part 2, which will come out in early June. And once again, if again, I know a lot of people who are maybe listening to this will probably want, if you're a content creator or if you're someone who runs a website or your own podcast or what have you, if you and I'm sure you want to discuss this story about Kevin Conroy, and I encourage you to, because this is another situation where, like, we were so close to getting it, but sadly we couldn't. But all I ask, as always, if you reference the story that you heard on this show, just link it back to the original source. We would really appreciate that. It's just common courtesy, and we thank you in advance in any way possible. But in terms of where you can find the Showrunner Whisperer, you can find Showrunner Whisperer along with Multiverse of Color on Facebook at Showrunner Whisperer and at Multiverse of Color. Those are the official Facebook pages. For Instagram, we're at Showrunner Whisperer and at the Multiverse of Color for Instagram. And on Twitter, it's a little different because we can't get all the letters in the handles, at Showrunner Talk and at Multiverse Color. And on Threads, we're at Showrunner Whisperer and at the Multiverse of Color. And on TikTok, we're at Showrunner Whisperer and at Multiverse of Color. And that's where you can find both the show and the Multiverse of Color's official social handles. The links will be in the show notes. In terms of where you can find me at Andy Behbakht all over social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, Kick, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, all at Andy Behbakht. As I mentioned with Kick and Twitch and YouTube, I'm a video game streamer, a variety streamer. So if you want to see me play video games, not great at it, but still want to see me play, go find me on those platforms. I'm a senior writer and interviewer for screenrant.com. So I cover all the latest news in the world of superheroes. So get all your coverage over there. And also, of course, I am the editor-in-chief of Multiverse of Color, your pop culture entertainment outlet from all the biggest IPs to the smallest independent stories from the perspective of people of color and members of the LGBTQ plus community. And in terms of this podcast, find the Showrunner Whisperer on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, anywhere you can find your podcast at. And also, if you have a couple of minutes of time to spare, we would really appreciate if you could just leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It's a great way to get the show more noticed in Apple Podcasts store so that more people can find the podcast, because not everyone uses social media, which is perfectly understandable. Social media these days is very toxic, so I totally get that. But it's a great way to support the podcast, get people to discover it more, and also it can hopefully open up more opportunities for us to bring on more people, more showrunners for maybe your favorite TV show. So, and it takes only a couple of minutes, and also it's a great way to let us know what we can do to improve the show. Because listen, I'm always here and open for constructive criticism and feedback. So if you could just take a few minutes of your time to do that, I would massively appreciate it. But that's going to be it. We'll be back on Wednesday, May 22nd, with a new episode. It will not be part 2 of our Chad and James interview. That will come in early June, but it will be related to a show that is making its return that week, and I'm really excited for you guys to check it out and hear it. So for all of my amazing team members here on the Showrunner Whisperer who helped make the show be what it is, Julian Bell, Mike Schmidt, Nate Milton, I'm Andy Behbakht, and I will see you next time on the Showrunner Whisperer.